If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Thanks for tuning in. And, I want to commend you for putting in the effort that you deserve. This personal growth stuff is not for the faint of heart, but you don't have an ordinary heart. You have a remarkably big heart. So, of course, you're going to be one of the few who pours it into everything you do and discovers how to shine that abundance of love on yourself by empowering your compassion. And there's no better way to do that than developing healthy boundaries. So today I've asked my friend Victoria Grandury to join me in breaking down the A of the Gates method, which is assess your capacity and your true yes. Let's get into it. Today I'm joined by Victoria Grandury. I'm delighted to have her here. She is a coach for high performers in cybersecurity. You can find her on LinkedIn or Instagram at limitless.rebel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mariya. I'm excited to be here and to see where this conversation about boundaries goes.
Yeah, me too. So when we had spoken before, you mentioned your exit from corporate and having a difficult boss who was kind of pushing your boundaries, and that on the other side, you found enhanced productivity and joy and all around work-life balance with some better boundaries. Can you tell me a little bit more about that journey?
I think the first time we interacted, it was at a local event, and you were asking people to talk about feeling resentful of someone. And I think at the time I had just exited from corporate, and I was feeling definitely resentful of, I'd say, an interaction with a manager that kept pushing my boundaries and kept pushing, how to say, the limits of how I would like to be treated and talked to, and written to and managed at this point, as the person who was reporting to them. And since, I have to say, in transitioning to being a coach and having my own business, boundaries have taken a whole other shape and form, because, as you know, when you don't have a boss and you're your own boss, you have to create structure and boundaries for yourself to get the work done, to also enjoy life and all the opportunities of life. And yeah, so that's been I think boundaries is definitely a word that I've used a lot in the last couple of years, to some people's annoyance.
Awesome. When you say that, as you use the word, sometimes it annoys people, it reminded me that you had also touched on in a previous conversation this kind of unfortunately common perception that boundaries are these walls of disconnection. And I have encountered several times when people decide to start developing boundaries and they talk to people in their life about, hey, I'm learning boundaries. And then the people in their life are like, oh, so that means you're just going to shut us out and cut us off and start, being more blunt, etc. And I certainly have some thoughts on that dynamic, but what was in there for you when you brought that up?
I think, now with some hindsight, the word boundaries can be really charged, because people can perceive it as someone's about to close a door, put up a wall. And so there's an element of disconnection, which can create fear in the other person of oh my God, they're about to cut me out. And a lot of us, are afraid of being rejected or abandoned. So that can kind of create a whole story. I think also something I've learned is when I start to grow and start implementing things, my growth has bothered or activated people, or created some sort of resistance. And so I've seen also that resistance as a, ooh, I'm reflecting to them maybe something they haven't developed as well. And by me saying, hey, I'm gonna create some space or take some time for myself, it's like, wait, why does she get to do it and I don't? But it's
Yeah.
not said, it's kind of implied.
Mhm.
Um, so I think what's been really interesting for me to remember, it's like I get to also set the example and to inspire others to do the same for themselves. And as a coach, I think that's really important. It's like showing the way, leading by example instead of not being like, hey, let's all set boundaries. What boundaries should you be setting today? And which boundaries should I be setting today? And yeah, and creating those, I think like this is who I am, this is where I am, this is where you start, and giving each other space for more, I'm gonna say like independence or freedom or focusing on whatever project you're working on, because that's also super important.
Yes. A lot in there. Circling back to this misperception of boundaries as these walls of disconnection, I find that belief that is really common in our society,
Hmm.
this core perception that boundaries are mean or harsh,
Hmm.
has two continuous consequences. So people who perceive boundaries as mean and know that they need to like assert a boundary, but they don't want to be mean. So instead, they have what I call flimsy fences.
Hmm.
They just don't say no. Or if they do, it's like really apologetic. Oh, I'm
Hmm.
so sorry. Or they'll just cave, and say yes anyway. And then what happens then is you end up over giving, overextending yourself, becoming completely depleted. And then as a result of that, coupled with the belief that boundaries are mean, you then like flip over into these spiked walls, as I call them, and
Yeah.
you're like, fuck off, and then your boundaries are really harsh. And so,
Yeah.
and then that just perpetuates the story that boundaries are harsh because that's the only way we ever encounter them. It's either flimsy fences or spiked walls. And so many people, sadly, operate in life with this, unfortunate, unnecessary, limited belief that those are the only two options for boundaries.
Mm.
And a lot of people that I work with are really like pleasantly surprised to learn that there is a third way. And I call those ones selective gates. And that's where we can say no without disconnecting. We can follow a yes with qualifications. Like, sure, I've got 5 minutes instead of just leaving things open-ended and getting trampled. And most importantly, I think, one of the sort of telltale qualities of selective gates is that we're drawing our boundaries around behaviors instead of people. And
Hmm.
that's just another way to soften it and make it clearly not personal. Brene Brown says boundaries are essentially what's okay and what's not okay. And so you
Hmm.
can just say, these are the behaviors that are okay, and then these are the ones that are not. And so you essentially give people the keys to accessing you through the gates that you've installed. You're like, I'm here. I'm good. This is where the gate is. If you can make your way over here, you're welcome. If not, that's cool too. You do you. But like this is where my gate is.
It's interesting what's coming up for me, like when I think of also the type of people that I coach in the cybersecurity space, and as high achievers, I'm gonna say it's who I was. Um, there's this desire to always do more and be there for everyone. But one boundary that I think early on I set was after a certain hour, I would like not answer emails and I would resume my day the next day. And I remember having a debate with a colleague where he was like, yeah, but if someone from a high level is emailing you at, 9 p.m., you got to answer. And I was like, do I? Like, I had this incident actually with a leader who I was working with who was so busy during the week that he would get to my emails on Sundays. But he clearly told me like early on when we were working together, hey, if you see emails coming from me on Sunday, it's because that's when I have quiet time and I prioritize this time to get back to you. But please don't answer me until you start your week. And I think like going back to emails or text messages and in the context of work, but also any kind of relationship like friendship. Like, for example, if I'm not answering after a certain hour, I'm teaching people I won't be replying after a certain hour. The more we are available to others, unfortunately, like people will always take what's given to them,
Mhm.
without understanding that it might be detrimental to our health or sleep, but because we've given them that mode of operating.
Mhm.
And I think it was at the end of my first job at Deloitte, it was one of the times where I was the most productive because I started like setting, they were more time boundaries, but I started prioritizing exercise. Like I'm someone who needs to exercise to feel good, and it actually helps us build our resistance to stress. And at the time I was in consulting where there's a lot of stress. So the more I exercised, the more I felt like I could handle my day better. But I would get home from my workout and I would be zonked. And so I created this boundary of like, okay, I'm gonna have dinner, watch like an episode, and then go to bed instead of continuing to scroll. And then I actually starting my day earlier because I had enough sleep and I could start my day at a time where it's calm and there's no one on, and get to the things that maybe some of my colleagues might have gotten to the night before. But for me, it just didn't work because I was exhausted. And that led to like even me with my team being like, hey, on these days I leave at this time because I have to get to my workout class. And it just everything started flowing better. The impact that I also had at work, like I felt so much more productive, efficient, and energized. Once we start protecting ourselves and our time and our energy, we also get so much back to be able to give out more.
Yes. And I think that's such a fascinating paradox. Like the fact that honoring our limits is what gives us more freedom. Like it seems so counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And this also brings up another thing that I don't know how many people in your space encounter this, but like there's this new age, I mean, it's maybe 10 or so years old, but whatever. This new age concept of like scarcity versus abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of people that are in the sort of spiritual development realm have struggled with this idea that we're not supposed to limit ourselves, we're supposed to be abundant. And so accessing boundaries can be even harder when you layer that belief on it. And that was something that I had to work through. At one point I had this epiphany when I realized that boundaries are essentially our resource limits. And then I was like, oh, but does that mean I'm limiting myself? And I just kind of had to unpack it a little bit. And I realized that, first of all, there's a difference between the scarcity as like an energetic, like
Mm-hmm.
when you go into something with that fear-based energy and that scarcity mindset, um, also similar to the corollary of like an abundance mindset, like it's an energy thing. Whereas in the material world of reality, scarcity is a thing. We do have finite resources, time being the best example, but even money, we can earn any amount of money, but it's still true that at any given moment in time, you have a fixed amount of money. And energy, we only have so much energy in a day. Attention, there's all of these different resources that once I realized that they are limited and that there's nothing I can do about it, the part of me that is a habitual silver linings finder, I realized that it's like diamonds and gold are precious because of their scarcity. Like that's literally what makes them valuable. And then I was like, oh. And then I started to see myself as like this noble steward of these precious resources. I saw that it was on me to manage them so that I have enough for the people and causes I care most about. Or to your point, just, the more that we take care of ourselves and prioritize taking care of ourselves, and we have more to give to our job, our career,
Mm-hmm.
our relationships, ourselves.
What you just shared reminds me of two things. One big trigger of scarcity mindset in the corporate space is imminent layoffs or layoff rounds. There's that fear trigger that you might be next. There's that fight or flight mode that gets into it. And so when that happened to me, I was like, no, 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 no. Just like keep the ship steady. Let me ground myself and understand where this fear is coming from because it's totally out of my control. So it's like a choice between, okay, do I want to sacrifice my social life, my health for this purpose, or do I just keep going and trust that I get to stay longer or I'll be part of the next one. And you know, it is what it is. The second thing that you were talking about that made me think of when we focus on ourselves, I like to think of like that we have batteries. There was a concept that I got introduced, which was there's like our mental battery, our spiritual battery, our physical battery, and our emotional battery. And we as humans will have times where we might be mentally challenged by something you're doing at work. You're emotionally, maybe you're okay, but then you're physically drained because you haven't slept or you haven't worked out. And when we let some of these battery levels get really low, it has an impact on the other stuff and then on how we show up in our day to day. And I had a client that I worked with who was a high performer in a very stressful environment. And one of his problems was that after work, because he had been so pressured and always on and always making decisions, he didn't even have the energy to pursue his own passion. And it was hurting him because the cost of him not pursuing that passion was actually hindering his motivation for work. And so now if I talk to my clients, I'm like, when's the last time you, I don't know, when's the last time you worked out? If that's something that's important to you, when's the last time you did something that like excited you? Because when we get to do those things, yes, it takes time, but it also cuts us off from this routine of like just giving out.
Mm-hmm.
And it flips the switch of like giving back to ourselves. And that's love, that's like self-care, that's like self-compassion. And we're talking about boundaries and compassion here. And I think a lot of us are so taught to take care of everyone else
Mm-hmm.
and to be there for everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But if we treated a friend the way we treat ourselves, we'd be like, mm, what am I doing? I'm a
Yeah.
terrible friend.
It's interesting too on an energetic level as well. Like your outflow
Mhm,
is more potent
mhm,
when the circuit is open and complete. So if you're not receiving,
mhm.
even from yourself, so like giving to yourself, taking care of yourself is more in the receiving energy. In the same vein that a lot of us are very conditioned to give and take care of other people, we also tend to have a hard time receiving. Like if someone wants to take care of us or give us something or offer us support, it's like, oh, no, 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 I'm fine. I don't need anything. Um, there's all kinds of stories to that, whether it's self-worth or feeling that you'll then owe them something and that maybe you've been giving so much that you think that if they give you something, you're going to owe them, but you don't have anything left to give extra, so you don't want to take anything. There's also like fears about, becoming reliant on somebody if they give something to you and then you won't be able to be independent anymore. Like there's all kinds of stories that we tell to get in the way of receiving. But the more we block the receiving, like I said, the less impact and the less potency our giving is going to be. So that's also kind of an interesting side effect of that.
Yeah, I think like definitely I've been someone who had a hard time receiving because for me it's like, well, I didn't deserve it and I need to deserve it to be able to receive it. And recently I was talking to a leader and it was a very similar concept, which was when I'm stressed or under pressure, I get into this, I've got it, I'm going to save everyone, like I'm going to take care of this. When usually, like if you're under stress and under pressure, you don't need more on your plate and you don't need to take more on. And so it's about, okay, how can I ask for help, which is vulnerable? And by asking for help, it goes back to what you were saying, like, I need to be able to receive this help and accept it. It's understanding that, like, under pressure,
Mm.
instead of trying to focus more on the others, that's the time where we need to be like, whoa, 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 like, what's happening? Let me ground myself. Let me get an understanding of like why I'm right now getting into maybe this savior mode or this um mighty mode instead of maybe taking a step back and getting more support.
Yeah. And to that, I think it's worth pointing out that like two things
Mhm.
are at play there. One of the elements is that when we're stressed, our nervous system is kind of in or getting towards survival mode, and it's not like our brains are not really quite as able to check in and be like, oh, see the bigger picture and realize what the best thing is to do. And that's why they say having a meditation practice, for example, is helpful, because you build that muscle so that it's more accessible in those types of moments, instead of only trying to access awareness when you're stressed. Like, that'll just never really work. So I guess I just want to give a shout out to anyone who is stressed and is aware that they have a pattern of hyper independence when they're stressed. And I just want to acknowledge that that's a coping mechanism. It's a pattern. It's there, and it's going to be hard to it's going to be difficult to recognize it when you're in it, because of the state of your nervous system in that moment. And because of that, second piece there is that what's important is to build up a practice on a regular basis, so that you can start to have easier access to it when you need it. And the practice that's involved there is, on a base level, awareness, just developing an awareness practice. I'm not going to go into all of it right now, but like, just, you can strengthen the muscle of being able to kind of drop into the observer and see what's happening in you, in the situation, etc. And once you notice that you're stressed, acknowledging that you have this coping strategy, like, you probably grew up with some environment that taught you that you can't rely on other people. And so when you're stressed, it feels easier to just do it yourself than to overcome the challenge of the newness and the unfamiliarity of trusting someone else to help you with it. And on a conscious level, sometimes the story we tell ourselves is, oh, it'll take more energy for me to get you up to speed than for me to just do it myself.
For sure.
But recognizing that that might be true in the immediate, in the long run, it will be better for the project. It will be better for whoever you're working with. It'll be better for you. And it's still worthwhile, even if it does take just a little bit of energy to get someone up to speed. The project will go better when you're supported than when you're stressed. Yeah.
What's the, when we think of boundaries, what's the pattern that you've seen in people that you work with around being able to communicate them?
To communicate boundaries?
Yeah.
Well, it's typically those flimsy fences and spiked walls. So for the most part, people just say yes too often because they don't want to say no. And I'm actually going to circle back to that, because there's like little asterisks there. Or they say no apologetically, or they say no a bit too harshly. And some people have their spiked walls up all the time, and they, like, maybe they had a pattern of flimsy fences in the past, and now they're in their spiked walls phase, and they're just like a hard no to everything, and they feel really empowered, but they've disconnected from their compassion.
Okay.
Whereas flimsy fences are maybe a little bit too compassionate without access to their empowerment. And so that's why I'm really all about empowering compassion, so it's big enough for yourself as well as others. And the asterisk to come back to is that I said people tend to say yes too often because they don't want to say no. But more frequently, what it is again, another like coping strategy where they just become like a reflexive yeser. Like, they just they've learned that other people being okay is them being okay. And so a lot of times people will say to people like that, you need to prioritize your own needs more. You got to take better care of yourself, have better boundaries. Stop saying yes too much. If you don't say yes when you need to say no, but it's like in the moment, you're just such a reflexive yes that you don't realize that you maybe should have said no. And that's because your nervous system it has this external orientation. And when you need other people to be okay, for you to be okay, you're not prioritizing their needs over your own, you're prioritizing them as your own. And just recognizing that is also like a form of compassion. Be like, oh, this is a pattern I'm doing that is actually an act of self-care. It's just kind of dysfunctional.
It's what you're saying. First of all, totally speaks to even a pattern that I have fallen into many a times. And something that helped me gain more awareness around that, especially the doing things for others for me to feel good, was when I started saying yes. Someone mentioned like listen to how it sounds. Like,
Mm.
is it a oh yeah, or like yeah. And I started noticing, I was like, that's not convincing. Like, whoa. And so then trying to find a way to maybe get out of that yes that was a little hesitant or a little half wanted. Um, but the sound, like I think we don't use the sound of our voice or tone as a metric. And that was like a really cool cue for me to start noticing when I say yes to things with like a excitement, like it comes from my belly and I'm like, yeah, let's do that thing. Versus the yeah, uh, no,
Sure.
should have said no. I really
Yeah.
don't want to go.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes too, like it's kind of a gradient, like a lot of
Mhm,
things. Um, I think sometimes we're so reflexive in our yes. It's like we're a yes to the requester before we even process what the request is. And
mhm,
sometimes that can still come out joyfully. Like, hey, would you do it? And it's like, again, your brain isn't even really processing what the request is, but you're like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then you're like, wait, I don't have the bandwidth to do that. Shoot, what have I just done? But you thought, I mean, it was a sincere yes in the moment, but you just didn't process it. Um, and then kind of the next phase is where you say yes with a little bit of that constriction. You're like, mm-hmm, sure, I'll do that. I don't know how, but if I can find a way. And then I think the next phase is that kind of more apologetic one where we'll say no, but we're like, oh man, I don't know if I can. And then maybe they twist your arm just a little bit and you're like, okay, yeah, no, yeah, it's okay. I'll make it work. And then you're like, and you think you're okay with it. You convince yourself that you're okay with it for a minute and then you start doing it. And then like the resentment starts to build up and you're like, damn it, why did I let them But it's not even why did I let them? It's like, can't believe they're making me do this. Sometimes the why did I let them takes a little bit more awareness further on down the line, but
Instead of saying when you have reflective yeses, to maybe pause, try to pause and be like, let me think about it. And
yes.
and sometimes even being able to think about it away from the person, depending on how that when or how they're asking you, can give you that space to be like, okay, how does this sit?
Yes.
And you can ask yourself the questions like, do I have the time, the bandwidth? Do I actually want to?
Yes.
Let me think about it. Uh,
Yes.
because that gives me time, depending on if the request by was like text or in person, but that gives me time to like either think about it with my phone in my hand or walk away and be like, okay, how does this actually feel? And come back to the person. Because I think it goes back to like how society we think we need to always be on and give answers right away, and people need things immediately.
Mhm.
And goes back to boundaries, like, oh, let me take some space, let me sit with it, think about it. Some people might find it weird at first. But I think it's a very powerful approach to tuning in to your
Absolutely.
own body.
Yeah. And I think also like as you're developing that connection to your body,
Mhm,
um, I think it's a perfectly fine rule of thumb to just answer every request or invitation or opportunity with, let me think about it. Even if
mhm,
you think you know that you're a yes or a no, like
mhm,
maybe I don't like planting seeds of self-doubt or self-mistrust, but
mhm,
maybe kind of temporarily recognize that you can't necessarily trust your impulsive response
mhm,
and just decide that you're just as a rule just going to say, let me get back to you in a little
mhm.
bit. And maybe you're still a yes 5 minutes later or whatever, or maybe depending on the decision, you might want to sleep on it. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a very good arrow to have in your quiver.
Mhm.
Mhm. A couple others that I also really like are I mentioned following a no with a yes, including qualifications with your yeses. So a couple examples of those would be my showroom example is oh shoot, no, I can't help you move today, but I can help you unpack this weekend, especially for recovering people pleasers who don't like how disconnecting boundaries can feel. Being able to follow that no with a yes, and it can even just be as simple as like, I'm not available for that, but I still love you. Or, I'm still here for you. The alternative offer can just be, moral support or energy or connection. It doesn't necessarily have to be a counter offer, but I find that really, really helpful. And
Before you go into the qualifying yes, I
yeah.
just want to also like give a really simple example,
Mhm.
which is I think like when people are making plans to see each other and it's like, hey, are you available? Like if I told you, hey, like, are you available tonight for dinner? And you could say like, no, I'm not. And that just cuts the conversation. Or you could say, no, I'm not tonight, but like I really like want to take you up on this offer. Like I'm free X these days, or like let's look in like a 2 weeks or something. But give the I think it goes back to your gates of like no,
Mhm.
and like we can find an option that works for both of us.
Yeah. And it's a way to maintain that connection as well. So instead of it being so harsh, like no. And again, it's also about kind of like clearing out that belief that boundaries are mean, because when we carry that, again, we're more likely to say no, either apologetically or kind of harshly. But when you realize that boundaries are just how we take care of ourselves so that we can, show up and care for those we love, um, then it can be much more of an honoring thing. And then you're in a more open, energetic space that allows you to kind of follow that no with a yes. So you can say like, oh my goodness, that sounds so great. I'm not available tonight, but like, and I know it's like a dinner party that I'll miss and I'll be sad to do that, but maybe you and I can catch up on Sunday or something, like to your point. And I think tying in work examples as well. Um, I and even the one that you gave, like a great way to say it is like, hey, I'm not available after hours, but I will definitely get back to you first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that way they know that you're not completely blowing them off and simply you have boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Go back. Okay, so now the yeses, how do you qualify yes?
Yeah. So I gave a couple examples of those before, but sure, I've got 5 minutes, or no worries, just let me know by Wednesday. Things like that can be really helpful instead of just because I think people pleasers, overgivers, overachievers have a tendency to just say yes to things and don't qualify them. And I think sometimes we have this silly assumption that people will just intuit
Mm-hmm.
what the parameters are, but it's like never hurts to just be explicit. I actually had a friend, two friends. One of them had the other one's sleeping bag, and they were coordinating getting it. And the friend who owned the sleeping bag but did not have the sleeping bag told the other friend, yeah, you just, bring it over whenever, no rush. And she told me that. And I know the other friend a little bit better than she does. And I know her very well as well. And I knew that she actually needed it like within a couple of weeks. And I was like, if you say no rush to that person, that's 6 months to 6 years. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit more explicit, like it's not urgent, but within the next 2 weeks would be great. You gotta say it.
Yeah, it's the same way like phone calls, sometimes you don't know when you're catching the person or what they're up to.
Mm.
And I've always assumed that people would tell me like, hey, I've only got, 5 or 10 minutes. And sometimes I've been on phone calls with someone who starts to get irritated. And I'm like, so I either the phone call stops and it's just like, ew, what was that about? Or at some point the person's like, oh, I gotta go. And it's like, okay, but sometimes just being clear with the other person from the get-go, like, hey, like I want to talk to you and I only have 10 minutes because I'm heading into a meeting, I'm heading into a dinner that I have to go to. That also, I think, helps to create the boundaries of
Absolutely.
the conversation.
Absolutely. And even not that it's necessarily our responsibility, but that sort of interpersonal accountability aspect in relationships that you care about, it can also be helpful when you call someone and they answer. You can say, hi, do you have a few minutes? Or like, what do you do? Check on the context that they're in. Because I've definitely been there as well. I have been very self-centered and not even considered. I'm like, hey, if they answer, they're free. They're doing literally nothing and can talk to me for literally as long as I need. And I forget to like check in with them. And yeah, there's an opportunity on both sides to kind of clarify that for sure.
Have more compassion for each other.
Yeah. So we were talking about the reflexive yeses, and it reminded me of kind of another aspect of yes. Not very related other than yes and boundaries. Something that was introduced to me kind of midway in my journey of discovering and learning more about and developing healthy boundaries was this concept that you can be boundaried in a way that's like guided by your true yes more than your no. And I do still think that as like a stepping stone, when people are healing from fawning and people pleasing and learning how to say no and learning boundaries, you do have to go through that like no phase. Learn how to say no, even if you follow it with a yes, and even express your no without disconnecting. But the goal that I think is really beautiful and inspiring is that boundaries aren't always just going to be about your no. And part of the healing journey also is about reconnecting to your body, as we've touched on before. And in part of that process, you get to like really start to feel into your truth and what your true yes and your true no are. And it's really hard to tap into that when you've got that external orientation and you're literally a yes to whatever they're a yes to. So getting back in touch with your yes and your no and what it feels like to be in alignment with yourself and your values and your goals and your limits, you can start to like create a boundary life that supports your yes. And a really benign, tiny little example of that is, let's say someone invites me to go out to something social and an evening, and I was already kind of planning on staying home and happy about it. And I was like ready to snuggle up and watch a movie. And I made my popcorn, and somebody calls me up and asks if I want to go out. And I really don't want to. Again, there's those different options where I might just say yes before realizing that I don't want to, or I might say yes with a little bit of clench, or I might actually say no, but be really apologetic about it. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I might even let them twist my arm into saying yes, or I might just be really harsh and be like, no, it's a Sunday night. Like, why are you even asking me? I might get like preemptively resentful about it. But if I'm actually connected to the yes, that I am a yes to staying in, because every no has a yes behind it. If you're a no to something, it's because there's something else that you're a yes to.
I like that.
And when you're connected to that yes, for example, if I was really connected to that I was a yes to staying in, when someone says, hey, do you want to go out tonight? I could just be like, no, thank you. And, right? Like I'm so yes, like
I'm
it's
so good right now.
It's like you're how do I say that? It's like your no is a yes to your yes. Like you're energetically still a yes to that no because it's in support of your yes. Instead
I was
of
about to say yes.
I know. Instead of the no being like a closed no, it's got the open energy of a yes because you're connected to that yes. And so that's why I can be like, no, thank you. Like I'm so good with staying in, but I really appreciate the invitation.
I definitely resonate with that because I had a time where recently I was doing my taxes and someone offered like, hey, you want to just like for me to come over with some wine? And I was like, sounds great, but no, because right now I have this objective that I put myself in. I was so committed to it. And I think that goes back to you were talking about like values or goals. And sometimes we're like, yeah, I think I know what my values are. I know what my goals are. And but then we say yes. And then if you think about it in hindsight, you're like, that actually wasn't really aligned
Aligned.
with my values or my goals, because I'll take an example. Some people prefer socializing in smaller circles and hate big circles. And so why would you say yes to a 30-person barbecue, for example? And interestingly, like in the last few weeks, I've had people tell me like, no, I'm not interested because I don't want to be around that many people. And I'm like, I'm actually like, when someone says that to me, I'm like, good for you for knowing what you want. Like, I respect that 100%. Like, I'm not gonna even try to convince you, because you know best what you need and what you want in that moment. And I'm okay also, because I have a yes to this because of my own values and my own goals. And I think sometimes maybe we don't respect other people's maybe agency as much, or really like, oh, but you're making the wrong choice, but without understanding how they actually made the choice. Uh, because we all have different values and goals. And there's some people who at a certain point in time are like, no, I'm not going out because I need to focus on XYZ thing and be up early. And for me, I'm like, okay, good. Prioritize. Like, I know where you stand.
I will also add here that I think part of this is a benefit of just age and maturity.
Yeah.
Because when I was younger, hanging out with younger people, even if I were to state things that clearly, I would still very often get my arm twisted. And that's also, of course, a reflection of what I was available for,
Mhm.
you know, energetically and relationship wise. But yeah, it's nice that more often than not, when you are clear about your boundaries, as a more mature adult, you're more likely to have people around you that respect it. And I also just want to give a shout out to anyone who, more than likely, if you have people in your life who are not respectful of that, it's probably family members. And it can be hard, and it sucks. And yeah, I send you love and courage if that's where you're at. But the more we can stay connected to our yes, the more energetically open and like comfortable and easy our no's are. And
Mhm.
I just love that. Do
Another
you?
behavior that's coming to mind, talking about younger self, and something that's definitely changed for me was when I overextended myself, the behavior that I had was I would flake on plans. So instead of communicating the, hey, like I'm not feeling up for this, or this is actually not the way I want to, like this is not the plan that I want to be doing right now, because there's sometimes, yeah, you're in the mood for a big party and there's other times you're just not. Um, I like started catching myself. I was like, okay, this period of time I'm starting to flake and like cancel plans, and so then I was able to kind of retrace being like, okay, why am I like, this is not who I want to be. Like, I don't want to be someone who doesn't communicate and just like flakes or doesn't show up. And it got me back to like, oh, but I'm not being like honest with my truth, which is just that this doesn't fit for me. And instead of just clearly communicating that to the person, I kind of leave them hanging or trying to convince me. And it just doesn't feel even better when someone tries to convince you that this is what you should be doing or where you should be.
Mhm.
Uh, so I would say to the people who flake or or like kind of overcommit and then are like regretting the overcommitment or the overextending, it's, I would say, an invitation to understand like, is it about the person? Is it about the context? Is it about also your period in life? Because there's period in life where we're just less keen, or as women, moments in our cycle where we're just less keen on socializing than other moments. And that's something that I had to realize. I was like, oh, these days I just don't want to see new people. And it took me so long to realize like there's a part of my cycle where I can be in a networking event and I get energized from it. You put those same events at another part of my cycle and I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, no. uh
Yeah.
like noticing that it's not weird, it's okay.
Yeah. And that actually is a perfect segue into the other piece I wanted to incorporate here, because kind of circling back to this A in the Gates method, which is assess your capacity and your true yes.
Mm.
And capacity I love that concept as kind of it's not all encompassing for what boundaries are, but it's a pretty big umbrella for a lot of our resource limits. And kind of on a side note, another thing that I really appreciate about this concept of capacity is other people, like all of us, we're not always aware of our boundaries and our limits, and often until they've been exceeded, right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to other people and interacting with other people, when like a great way to detect a boundary in someone else is by observing their capacity limits. Like they might not even be aware of it, but you'll see the limits of their capacity by how they show up
Mhm.
and what they do or don't follow through on. And they might have every intention of I don't know, maybe some aspect of self-improvement or something, or showing up in a different way, and they just consistently fail to meet that.
Mhm.
And you just kind of have to acknowledge, like, oh, well, I'm encountering the limits of their capacity here, and it could be that more long-term arc, or it could be an immediate thing. But with ourselves, to your point, capacity can fluctuate day to day, week to
Yeah.
week, hour to hour. And so maybe one day we have more capacity than we do in a different day. Maybe some days we have more capacity for some things and less capacity for others. And just acknowledging that and being true to that is, again, just something that not only nourishes us, but also nourishes our relationships.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned being in alignment with your values, goals, and limits. It's also helpful to do an inventory, like what are my values, and there's lots of resources online that you can kind of get some vocabulary that helps you connect the dots. I definitely recommend coming up with like your top 5. And again, those might change month to month, year to year, but a couple that are consistently true for me is like integrity and connection, things like that. And values and goals can kind of be interchangeable depending on the context. Like in a way, connection is a value of mine, but also in a particular exchange, the connection might be the goal. There's that common saying about like, is it more important to be right or to be connected? And so if my goal is connection, I can let go of being right. And then the limits again is that kind of being aware of your capacity. And so alignment is kind of like balance. If you're trying to stand on one foot, there's a lot of micro adjustments that need to happen. And so you're kind of constantly falling out of and coming back to. But I think the idea is to try and find that continual alignment with your values, goals, and limits. And then on the like non-cognitive level, there's a frequency, an energetic frequency that is yours, that is your truth. And when you're in alignment with that, you feel it and your whole life reflects it.
Yeah. The other thing that I was thinking was noticing when you feel energized versus drained.
Yeah.
Um, because you might like put it through the lens of the values or the goals and realize like, oh yeah, this is why, like, let's say you went to a 500-person event and your goal and your values is connection and there was no space to actually like talk or connect. That might feel very draining to you versus 6 people dinner where there's prompts or cards and people share.
Mm.
Definitely like for me, well, it was like noticing that when I come back from an experience, like excited, pumped, like there's a high to it versus I'm either dragging my feet getting there and or dragging my feet like coming back from it.
Mm.
And that can be like the way to tweak the machine slowly of like, okay,
Mm.
well, I used to do this. I realize now that doesn't really work. Now I'm gonna start saying, no, I don't want to go to this kind of event, but I'll see you in another context or I'll do this other plan.
Yep. I again with the following a no with a yes, if someone were to invite me to a really large event, I would definitely be like, no, that's not really a place I'm comfortable, but I really enjoy spending one-on-one time with you. How's Sunday?
Yeah.
Mhm. And it's nice too to let them know if you know. I mean,
Mhm.
you can always say, I'm just not feeling that. That's not really feeling aligned for me right now.
Mhm.
You don't necessarily have to have more clarity on it. Or I've also had people say no to me with something like, I don't know, something like that's not really speaking to me right now.
Yeah.
Or just whatever, like,
But like that doesn't work for me. Like,
yeah.
mhm.
I'm checking in with my body right now and I'm not feeling excited about it. So I'm gonna pass. I'm like, okay, cool, thanks.
Mhm.
Because the
I've
other thing too that's really beautiful is when you're relating with people who are fluent in boundaries,
Mhm.
you start to really appreciate that when they're comfortable saying no, they're sincere when they say yes. And you start to really find an appreciation and an enjoyment in being able to really trust that when someone is there with you and engaging with you like they want to be. And you can trust that because you know that they don't have any problem saying no. So if they didn't want to be there, they would have just said no. And so that, then that means they really do want to be there. And then when they say no, you're like, cool, I wouldn't want you to be there without really wanting to anyway. So like I'm bummed that you're not going to come to this thing with me, but I'm more happy that you're taking care of my friend whom I care about. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Like you're doing you. Mhm.
mm-hmm, yeah. And I care about you. So I appreciate that you're taking care of you.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
That really hits.
Yeah, in what way?
I was recently in a situation where I would say like I overextended myself with a friend, not realizing how much until I got to the point where my then reaction was to put up the walls um to protect myself, my energy. And you mentioned like the trust, and definitely like that kind of reaction, I would say, frazzled the trust that we had between us of like, oh, I guess then when we're spending time together, it's not as genuine as this friend thought. Um, and so now I'm like, okay, it's interesting because it's like the time I spend with this person, of course it's genuine and I always enjoy when I am spending time. And I realized that when I prioritize that to an extreme, then that impacts the friendship, but it's also on me to learn to communicate better and tune into myself better.
Yeah. It's the difference between being nice and being kind.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And also the difference between the stories that I was telling myself that made me have this reflexive reaching out. Like I know, for example, that a behavior that I have, which crosses my own boundaries, but it goes back to where you said people who tune into others. Like I'm the friend who calls others, I'm the friend who texts others, I'm the friend who asks to hang out. And sometimes I'm just like,
Why did I do that?
why do I like go through the list of friends and just like let's let's not do that. And now recently I've started like quieting that out and just really doing it when I really want to talk to this person instead of, oh wait, I haven't heard from them in a while. Like I should reach out to them versus I want to reach out to them, or I should see how they're doing. And it's freed up some of my time. It's freed up my mental space, and it's just definitely left like more space for my intuition to play.
Nice. I fully support that. I very similarly, but slightly different. I realized that there were especially some particular friends that
Mhm.
I was always the one reaching out and initiating contact.
Mhm.
And I was like, maybe what if I just don't? And so I kind of drew it back and like the time would just go on. And it was so hard. Like the kind of anxious people pleaser in me would like come up and be like, oh, but like I'm a bad friend. It's been too long. I should reach out and check on them. But one thing that really struck a chord with me was one of my closest friends. I don't remember the words that she used, but she was very tactful about it. And it was so helpful. And she was also quite plain about it. And she said something to the effect of maybe you're just their B friend. You know, there's like A-listers and B-listers. And the idea was that I was treating certain people as though we had like an A friendship, but to them it was just a B friendship. And so I'm also a big proponent of, not in a transactional way, but more in a balanced way, like matching energy.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. And it stung just a little bit, but I was like, oh, sure. So I'll just dial back my, like what I put into it to kind of more match like how they're showing up. And those friendships have very much fizzled out. I was like, wow, I was like carrying them, like carrying those friendships.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, that can be very freeing to recognize those
But
things.
it's interesting. Actually, this was a sentence that I learned recently, which was caring for others is not about carrying them. And I think that's goes back to boundaries. It's like sometimes it's important to match the energy a bit of like someone's not reaching out, then why are you pouring so much into them not reaching out instead of maybe pouring into others who are more available and reaching out and don't need like so much energy or time. And I know for me that it's like if I make sure everyone else is okay, then I'm okay.
Yeah. And that the solution there is really just about learning how to kind of reorient instead of having that external orientation where your sense of safety and security is based outside of you, learning to root your security within. It's a process, I won't lie. Coaching has really helped me get there, and you and I are both available to help other people with that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, being able to have that internally rooted security is what gives you that foundation to, at first, brave the risk of rejection by just knowing that like I've got me, I'm going to be okay. And if I say no and they get upset about it, I'm the steady rock for myself now and it's going to be okay. But yeah, I'm going to get a little bit more into that type of dynamic when we get into the tea. But today, Victoria has graciously joined me, and I know you mentioned you work with high achievers in cybersecurity. Will you tell me a little bit more about that and where people can find you?
For sure. So as I work with high achieving cyber professionals, what I do is pretty much what we've been talking about for this whole episode, which is help those people put their oxygen mask on first so that they can catch their own breath. And I guide them from like burnout or survival mode or full disconnection from their body to reclaiming their energy, their time, and their focus. And talking about breath, I actually do that through hypno breath work, because the breath is what gets us to regulate our nervous system. And I'm gonna say shut off the fight or flight mode and get back into this like grounded presence where we can hear ourselves better.
Nice. That's awesome. And if folks wanted to look you up, where would they find you?
Oh, they can find me on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
my full name, Victoria Grandury, or on Instagram at limitless.rebel, which is my brand.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining as well. If anyone wants support around personal boundaries, especially more as it pertains to their personal life and relationships, I'm happy to do that. You can go to explorelovingboundaries.com and set up a free call with me. No strings, no charge, just holding safe space, offering some validation and support, potentially solutions, and at least some free resources. So thank you again, Victoria, and we'll talk again
Thank you,
soon.
Mariya. Talk soon.
Thanks again for tuning in. And wherever you are on your journey, rest assured that there is a lot of freedom and love on the other side of healthy boundaries. So, wherever you can, see where you can empower your compassion, even just a little. Until next time, I send you love and courage.